Great. Is that
Looks good.
showing perfect?
It is. Yep. And you sound clear to me. Thank you.
Practice, practice. Great. Well, thanks for having time for us to join this presentation. We're happy to be talking with CARB and SoCalGas. And we really want to focus on low carbon fuel standard credits. I think they're interesting area that can kind of overlap with air quality regulations, overlap with converting your fleet. There's a lot of ways these things interrelate, so I'm looking forward to discussion at the end of this. But I will jump right in, I think. There we go. Yeah, so we are talking about how you can actually generate revenue from your EV charging. And EV is a broad term. We'll get into what that can include. And this is all under California's low carbon fuel standard program. So I'm going to say the word LCFS a bunch of times, and I'll start with defining what that is, but it's a low carbon fuel standard. I'll walk us through just how the LCFS program works, what the regulation is, what kind of vehicles are eligible, what kind of role CARB plays in it. It's pretty different than a typical like air quality regulation. We could look at the steps it takes to create these credits and how much revenue you can create from different vehicle types. And then touching on a lot of things that SoCalGas just mentioned too, about how to integrate this into a larger plan when you're looking at your return on investment and trying to decide what's the next best thing to do for your vehicles. So the low carbon fuel standard is legislation passed by California aimed at reducing greenhouse gas emissions, specifically from transportation sources. They made this specific program for transportation fuel because that creates 40% of the greenhouse gas emissions in California. So they kind of decided to focus on it with this standard. And what it is more of a cap and trade style marketplace. So the regulation establishes a carbon intensity that a transportation fuel can have. And if you are using fuel that is below that carbon intensity, like electricity, like renewable natural gas, or renewable hydrogen source, then you are actually creating credits because you're below the carbon standard using even less carbon than is mandated. If you are producing or importing fuel into the state that has a higher carbon intensity, this is your conventional oil and gas, diesel, gasoline, then you're going to have a deficit because you have too much carbon in your fuel. You're above the standard. So the entities that have a deficit, they buy the credits from the people using low carbon fuel to bring their score into compliance. So it creates this little marketplace. Actually, it's a very multi-billion-dollar marketplace. It's not so little, that incentivizes the people that are using low carbon fuels and increases the cost of doing business if you are importing or producing high carbon fuels, to try to motivate people to move towards low carbon. So it's not a funded by CARB program. The revenue comes from the purchase of the credits from the oil and gas companies, basically. CARB does certify everybody that participates in the program. So they're looking at, making sure if you say you're using electricity as a fuel, you actually need to register that and report how much electricity. They validate all that to make sure that it's a legitimate credit. And on the flip side, if you're producing, have an oil and gas well, or importing fuel, they'll look at, from the ground to the vehicle, how much carbon is in that life cycle to determine how high a carbon intensity you have. So they're kind of checking everybody's numbers to make sure they're legitimate, but they're not saying you have to use this specific technology or you have to, buy this number of credits. They just say, figure out how to get your score in compliance, either by bringing down your carbon score or purchasing credits from low carbon users. Hopefully that makes sense off the bat. Just to elaborate on that, they've defined what kind of vehicles are creating credits. And this is great, really relevant. The truck refrigeration units are eligible, as well as the actual trucks themselves, if you have, a fleet of electric trucks. EV chargers that are for staff or for public use. Heavy duty vehicles, if you're charging those, you can generate credits. Electric forklifts create credits. That's a great source. There's a lot of forklift regulations coming down the pipe, and being able to get credits from using electric forklifts can help fund converting to electric for people that haven't already. Electric yard semis, cargo handling equipment, material handling type things. And then there's a whole range of specific port and ocean going and rail yard equipment that's sort of custom to those uses. The thing to keep in mind is not all kilowatts are created equal. So you may get a higher ratio of credits for a truck refrigeration unit or a heavy duty vehicle than you would for a light duty passenger vehicle, because the effect it has on emissions to go from a big heavy diesel load to electric is a greater greenhouse gas reduction than going from a light duty gasoline use to a light duty electric use. So it's important to keep that in mind when you're trying to calculate how many credits you're going to generate and what kind of revenue you'll see from different vehicle types. And just to touch on this again, so we like to talk about the carrot and the stick. We think of the LCFS credits as really a carrot. It's a way to reward people that are using low carbon fuels, using renewable fuels. And it's an opt-in program for those users. So it's not required. It's a stick for the oil and gas, diesel, gasoline producers. But CARB is not saying exactly what technology they have to use or credits they have to buy. They're saying you have to bring your score into compliance, work it out in this marketplace. They're acting more like a referee than implementing, doing inspections, requiring registration for regulations. And again, the funds come from the deficit holders, so this isn't a grant, it isn't a one-time rebate, it's a recurring source of revenue for people that are generating credits. Things like the Advanced Clean Fleet Rule, the zero emission truck refrigeration units, zero emission forklifts, all of those air quality rules, they are separate CARB programs. Just to be clear, this is a different arm of CARB that implements the low carbon fuel standard. It is all part of the Air Resources Board. And you may do one thing that, generates low carbon standard fuel credits and also brings you into compliance with an air quality regulation. But just keep in mind, they are actually separate programs within CARB. So now we're getting to the more fun part, how much money, how do you get the money? So there's several steps, like I mentioned, to create LCFS credits. This is to make sure everybody's participating on an equal playing field, that all your credits are legitimate. So you register the equipment. If you have an EV charger, you're usually registering the charger. If you have a true or a forklift, you actually register those units, but collect information on the chargers. Each vehicle has a little bit different nuance on what you need to register it, but you actually are reporting this vehicle charger at this location is now going to generate credits. You then track how much energy it's using. We usually talk about electricity because it's the most common fuel source out there, low carbon fuel source. So you're going to measure how many kilowatt hours are being used by each registered vehicle. It's also wise, if you have the opportunity, to enhance those credits. I will try not to get into too much detail on this because it can be a little bit confusing, but if you think about electricity, the grid electricity is not zero carbon, as you guys all know. It's a mix of all sorts of different fuel sources, that some of which are high carbon. You can do a book and claim system where you also purchase and retire credits from solar energy that are zero carbon, or wind energy is zero carbon, so that you are on paper making your energy use zero carbon. That enhances your credit score significantly, so you will generate more credits for your energy usage. It's a complicated step, but it is worth doing to increase your revenue. So we've done all that. Now we submit our reports every quarter to CARB, giving them all the vehicle information, all the usage information, the retired solar energy credit information, answering any questions they may have. CARB verifies everybody's reports once a quarter and actually issues credits into the online account. It's an online portal that everybody participates in. When the credits hit your account, that's the end of CARB's role. Now you interact through a brokerage or through a service provider, or directly with a oil and gas producer that's trying to buy credits to sell your credits. And it's when you sell them to that party, that they actually turn into dollars. So the price of a LCFS credit moves widely. It's been an exciting year for LCFS prices. But it is a supply and demand marketplace. It's each transaction can move the needle. It's kind of like the stock market. It goes up a lot, comes back down sometimes, course corrects. So there's not a set price. It has to do with the deal you make with the other party. And there's all sorts of things that influence that. But that's how you actually turn the whole process from your electric forklift, your electric truck, into a check for your business. So here's some examples of how much revenue we're talking about. This is based on the recent market pricing. So like I said, that does move, but this is based on the values this week. And we've kind of shown a low, medium, high usage. It's all about how much energy you use. So a forklift that runs 1 shift a day will not generate as many credits as a forklift that runs 3 shifts a day. A true that has only used occasionally versus a true that's charged every night or runs for 12 hours in between shifts at its facility will generate a different amount of credits. So keeping in mind the amount of energy used for charging will affect your revenue. And the thing to know about the revenue is that, there's not really a downside risk, right? This is revenue a lot of people are leaving on the table right now. So it's, even if you're only not sure how much you're gonna use your vehicle, or you don't know if it's going to be a long-term opportunity, it's still worth doing because you can create that revenue right now and benefit from that to spend it on things like electricity costs, infrastructure costs, equipment costs. When you're looking at those things in your budget of how do I get my fleet into compliance in the future, this is revenue that you can spend on converting to electric, training your staff, getting your mechanics ready to work on electric vehicles. There's all sorts of opportunities to spend that money to get you in a better place with future compliance. And this is just to say, this is an example of each of one of these is a single vehicle. So I'm sure you guys are doing the math in your heads of multiplying this by, how many trues do you charge at one large facility, and can see that it adds up pretty quickly. So now I wanted to talk about some of the benefits of doing this and how they kind of all fit as pieces of the puzzle. My first and foremost, my favorite is data. We're definitely big data nerds here. When you create the credits, by nature of completing those steps I talked about, like the registration and measuring the energy usage, knowing how many credits you generated per vehicle, you are de facto getting all sorts of good data on how much are you charging a vehicle, where are you using it, where is it domiciled, what are your carbon dioxide equivalent reductions by vehicle. So you get all of that information by participating in this program. This example is for one of our customers, but anybody that's participating needs to have this information to participate. And then you can turn around and use that to make sure your doors compliance is up to date. We've seen customers and partners that, didn't realize they had as many electric forklifts as they did, and they were able to add them to doors and reduce their total fleet score. Or identify ways that, maybe if you're looking at your doors and you're trying to figure out if you need to add electric forklifts, how can you do that to bring you into compliance there, and what would the revenue look like on this side? If you're in the South Coast Air Quality District, this would really help with WARES reporting. That's going to have a lot of information that needs to be reported based on location and charging. This would provide that data, or vice versa. One feeds the other. So there's a lot of benefits to having this data in an organized place to inventory your whole fleet. When you're looking at capital improvements or purchasing or leasing new vehicles, being able to see what do you really use and what are you really creating with your existing fleet can help you make accurate return on investment analysis for future purchases. And of course, marketing sustainability initiatives, showing that you've done these things, having this data handy that you can put into a report or give some numbers to your marketing team, or share a blog post about your sustainability initiatives. It's a lot easier when you have real numbers to back it up readily available. I really like data. And it's also something you want to think about when you're selecting an EV charging technology. There's so many different options out there in terms of manufacturers that make EV chargers. Making sure you have good access to the information you need from that charger. They all have sort of a different dashboard. Can you download that the way you need it for your reporting? Can you access that to get LCFS credits, or is the EV charger trying to claim the LCFS credits without telling you, because that happens. So it's important to keep those things in mind too when you're looking at EV chargers, is how can you make sure that data is really going to serve all of your needs. And of course, data is just one of many things to think about when making a comprehensive plan. And I think Mike talked about a lot of these, but it takes a lot of things to come together to really move your fleet in a significant direction towards zero emissions. Obviously, your operations and your staff and your facility all need to be taken into account. It does cost money to do this. That's why LCFS credits can help with that. But knowing that, having in your budget and not being caught flat-footed when the regulation comes out is important. Knowing what the regulations are and how they apply to them. So participating in this webinar, getting that great information from Kevin about, which types of truths and when we'll have these regulations, what are the exemptions, and being able to look at that comprehensively with your fleet to know what your highest priority vehicles are. And including the savings, LCFS credits are one type of revenue, but reduce fuel costs, reduce O&M work, improved health and safety for your employees are all big savings to take into account in the overall analysis. So we always encourage people to really take it on as a larger project. It can require interdepartmental conversations, but if you really want to have a successful conversion of your fleet, it's bringing everybody to the table to see all the different benefits and how to get it done. And one of the big things that helps getting it done is obviously funding. There are definitely opportunities out there right now, as Kevin mentioned, for those early adopters. So it's a good time to be looking at what you can do now and planning ahead that'll really benefit you compared to once the regulation goes into effect. And a lot of these things you can stack together. So you can get tax credits, you can get LCFS credits, and you can get a grant from the VW Mitigation Trust or your air district. The utility infrastructure, there's a lot of programs with the IOUs to upgrade your infrastructure. If you're looking at putting in a fleet of chargers, you may need to upgrade the service to your building. And there's some really good opportunities there to split that cost with the utility and have them fund some of those upgrades. And they want to do it, they're going to ask you for what your plan is in the next 5 years. So it all ties together to having that plan in effect. But it's a great way to get people on board, see some early wins, get used to this technology, is to get a grant and see it work for your operations, and then continue to chip away at your whole fleet. So that's the quick summary on LCFS credits. PineSpire is always happy to answer questions about data, obviously, LCFS credits, and anything else we can just help people figure out how to successfully convert their fleet to zero emissions.